Okay, hello and welcome to this next edition of my live Mokume Q A. I'm Anne. I'm happy to join you guys. And today, this is live, but it's also being recorded to YouTube. So if you're joining me later and it's not live, it's a shame that we missed you, but maybe join us for the next one. I've been doing these every month or maybe 6 weeks or so, depending on a Saturday morning for me on the West Coast. But wherever you can join us, we'd be happy to have you. All right, so the topic for today is patinas. And I think I'm going to go ahead and start to share my screen so that you can see some wonderful images that I have prepared. So today I'm talking about patinas, and I'm also answering your guys' patina related questions. I have a bunch of them that we'll go through, but I also have a little presentation first. And so we'll get started with that. So first off, I just feel like I should ask, what is a patina? Because people have different ideas about what patinas are. And in my view, a patina is technically, it is an oxide layer that forms over time on a metal with the interaction of oxygen. So that's what we've got going on with patinas. They need to be some sort of chemical that's reacting to the metal, and then also time. So the image that you're seeing here are more traditional patinas, and I just thought it would be fun to include it. This was a workshop I took with David Wong in Mesa, Arizona, right before all hell broke loose in March of 2020. And so these patinas that you're seeing on the screen are just on mostly on copper. I think a few of them are on red brass, but they are more traditional patinas where you're building up quite a thick layer of oxide on the surface by using different chemicals and usually heating the piece and either spraying the chemical on or dabbing it on with a brush. This is more classic patinas. Let's see. Bryn, do you want to say something? I see that you raised your hand.
I was just saying hello.
Oh, hello, Bryn. Good to see you. Glad you made it. Bryn is joining us from the east coast of Australia. So what time is it for you over there?
4 a.m. So
Oh,
just
dear.
Thanks to Darren Hiles for helping me out with getting on here. So,
yeah. Excellent. Oh, I'm so glad you could join us. And sorry for the whether you would call it a late night or early morning. I'm not sure.
It's about the time I normally wake up.
Oh, all right then. Okay. Yay. Thanks for joining us. Okay. So going on with the patinas. The problem with these sorts of patinas is they tend to occlude the surface of the metal such that you don't really see the color of the metal much underneath, and they react very closely. The different metals react very similarly, right? So they don't work as well for mokume because you don't see the pattern of the mokume underneath the patina, because the patina is thick and crusty, and it's not going to respond to the fine lines of the changes back and forth of silver to copper or silver to brass or that sort of thing. So these sorts of patinas are thicker. We don't use them as much, and they are what a lot of people think of as traditional patinas. For instance, that green patina in the center that builds up over time, like ammonia and salts, and it's thick and crusty. It doesn't work for Mokume Gane. So let's go on and see some patinas that do work for Mokume Gane. And again, when I started going through this, at first I thought, oh, this will be an easy topic and it'll be just a short thing, but oh my gosh, it's just a huge topic. So please don't consider this. If you're new to Mokume Gane or you're viewing this video later and you're thinking, oh, now I'm going to know everything about patinas and I can use this as a how-to. This is not considered, please don't consider this a thing where you can actually now do this and have the instruction. This is just a broad overview, and you'll go away with some knowledge certainly, but there's so much more. So 3 common patinas that are used for Mokume Gane, liver of sulfur, and that is seen on this bracelet on the right. This bracelet is copper and brass, and that is the patina colors that we see. And then Baldwin's patina. These first two are very easy patinas to use. That's why I put them first. And this image on the left here is Baldwin's patina on silver and Kuro Shiguichi. Kuro Shiguichi is an alloy of copper and silver. It's nothing to be alarmed or like it sounds a lot more exotic than it is. You can make it yourself just by taking copper and alloying it with like 5% or 10% silver. So, and it patinates that lovely dark, almost black with Baldwin's patina, which is available in the US. It may be difficult for you to get Baldwin's patina if you're outside the US. There are some thoughts about what it contains, and we can talk more about that later. And then thirdly, we have to include rokusho or niagi. So I'll talk more about what those two words mean when we get to that. But this is the much more traditional Japanese patina that's used for Mokume Gane, and it's far more fussy and involved. It requires a lot of ingredients, some specialty equipment. No, well, it's not like it's expensive equipment, but you got to get a copper pot, get a great cheese grater. It's you got to get your Daikon Radish. We'll talk about that. It's a little more complicated, but I know that from the questions that I got from you guys that asked questions beforehand, everybody wants to know how to do the copper red. So this centerpiece, that's probably one of my better copper reds, but I'll talk more about that later when we get to it. So, first off, liver of sulfur.
May I ask a question?
Sure, when you speaking, I'm just curious. Can't see you.
Okay. When you say it's silver, and when you refer to the metal being silver, are we referring to fine silver or sterling?
It could be either. In my case, it's sterling silver, and I know that some of you are thinking, "Oh my God, that adds a layer of complexity," because sterling silver, of course, has that 7.5% copper in it. So that can make the patination a little more complicated and change it. But I do tend to use sterling silver, even though it does make my life more complicated. I like the strength that it gives to the metal. So, but in general, fine silver and sterling silver react very similarly to patinas.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, so liver of sulfur. Probably any of you who are familiar with jewelry making use liver of sulfur already to make your copper dark. It will also make silver dark. It makes brass go this nice deep gold, and it's easy and quick. I will tell you that I use also a little bit of ammonia in my liver of sulfur, and that helps the copper stay dark, and it keeps the brass from getting too dark. And I do have a little video to show, and this bottom one also is, of course, an example of copper and brass. Right. So here is just a little video showing putting on a liver of sulfur patina. You should be wearing gloves. I just, what can I say? I'm a rebel. So you can see in the background conveniently hidden behind my hand, is the liver of sulfur gel. That's kind of the still new school. I learned with the little rocks back when I was in school in the 90s, 30 years ago. But you can see how easy that is, really. The color develops quite quickly. You want to keep it moving in the solution as you go. And again, this is copper and brass. And it works great when the Mokume layers are fairly thick, not necessarily broad, but that you're not having just like 2 molecules of copper on top of your brass, that you haven't squished your metal down so thin and patterned so finely. If you do pattern quite finely, the copper and the liver gets a little confused. It thinks the copper is a little bit more like brass, and it thinks the brass is a little bit more like copper. This is yellow brass. That's much better contrast than if you had a billet that was copper with red brass. So whenever I'm doing a base metal billet like this, it'll always be yellow brass with copper. Right. So I really had trouble deciding how to categorize this because we're talking about patina, but we're also talking about a specific metal combination. And the thing is that this liver of sulfur is going to do different things on every different metal. So that's a challenge to, I thought at one point, well, you could organize this and say, well, what patinas would you use for copper? What patinas would you use for brass? What patinas would you use for silver? But that got too complicated. So I went with this way of describing it instead. So that's a fairly simple patina. Now let's go to Baldwin's patina. Again, it's a really easy patina to use. So it's one of my favorites, certainly in my workshops. It's one of my favorites when I teach in-person workshops, or even when I do my online classes, because it's so easy and fast to use. So here's 2 examples of what colors you can get with Baldwin's patina. On the left, we've got sterling silver, red brass, and copper on those 3 bracelets. And I use the Baldwins just really just a little bit, just a hint of it. And I'll show a video too of applying Baldwins to Mokume, but you don't want to leave it on too long. Otherwise the copper will go too dark really in this, in that particular combination. And then on the right, we're looking at sterling silver, copper, and Kuro Shiguichi, those 3 colors. And that patinates really nicely down. The Kuro Shiguichi and Baldwins are just so nice. You get that really dark, almost black brown. And then it makes the copper look more red, even though it's really not red. It's just a nice, really Baldwin's just makes copper go a nice nut brown. It's no red, but in combination with Shiguichi, it just, I really like that color combination. So those are your 2 easy patinas. And the first one is great for base metal that doesn't have any silver in it, because the silver will also go dark with liver. The second one is great for any Mokume combination that has silver in it, because it won't affect the silver. It'll keep the silver nice and bright. It would affect nickel, however. So the nickel is okay. Well, we'll talk more about your question, and of course, do some tests. Oh no, it wasn't. Okay, it was Dale. But yeah, Baldwin's will affect nickel as well. So here's just an image of putting on. Here's a little video of putting the Baldwin's patina on. This little bottle is not this bottle is how it comes if you take one of my online workshops. I send out a little sample size of Baldwin's patina. But if you buy it from Reactive Metals, that is the source for it. It's made by Philip, it was invented and made by Philip Baldwin, and he sells it, I think, fairly exclusively through Reactive Metals. I'm not sure. You guys can let me know. But so just put it on a paper towel and rub it on. Couldn't be simpler. Of course, the metal needs to be clean and prepared properly. We haven't really shown that part of it or talked about that. And actually, right at the end of this video, I'm going to show what I would say my secret is, which if you're a student of mine, you're laughing already, to get really clean, perfect lines with your patinas. But there you go. So that sample that I'm working on there is just silver and copper. We're just seeing the silver with that nice nut brown. And I'm just going to have a look at the chat. Okay. So moving along. So the last of the 3 patinas that we'll discuss in detail is rokusho. Now, the word rokusho is actually refers to a green powder that you can either get in Japan or from Reactive Metals. That green powder is mostly copper carbonate, I believe. It also has calcium carbonate and some salts in it. But when we do the rokusho patina, normally we add copper sulfate, right? I've got this thing where I get the sulfate and the nitrate mixed up in my head. So if I've got that wrong, someone tell me. So you add the copper sulfate in equal parts, pretty much, to the rokusho. And so when you do that, the patina you're doing is actually Miyagi. And it gets, but we tend to just use the term rokusho, but nobody tends to just use rokusho by itself. You always add the copper sulfate. So the instructions for doing rokusho and the formulas and all of that are readily available here in the US through Reactive Metals. If you buy their rokusho and their cupric sulfate, it'll come with instructions. You can follow those instructions and it will work. So, so I just want to say that. Now here, the images that I'm showing here, the one on the left is the tea container that I made. And the one on the right is by Earl Bushy, who is here today. And you can see that Earl's red is way more red than mine. And, you know, it could be a little bit of a factor of the photography. Maybe the contrast is bumped up and maybe mine's a little grayed out. But honestly, Earl has done, Earl and his friend Jean, who's also here today, have done great research in making the copper get really red in the rokusho. And so maybe we'll have him talk a little bit about that. Let's see, I'm going to go to the next slide. And just so that you understand, this is just my bench on rokusho day. So is complicated. It wants to be you're dipping your piece in the patina and it's just below boiling, sort of steaming temperature. It should be a copper pot. It shouldn't be steel. It shouldn't be glass or anything like that. In a pinch, I think glass is okay, but not any kind of steel or any kind of, you don't want any zinc in there. And of course, then you're wondering, what in God's name is that? That's the Daikon Radish. And yeah, you really do need to use that. If you have silver in your rokusho, you want to grate the radish. This is one of those graters from IKEA. I love this thing. Has this slits the grater right there, and then you can grate right into that container. And then put in distilled water about a little bit of distilled water with your grated radish, and submerge your piece in there. And it does this really interesting thing with an enzyme. People haven't figured out actually exactly what it's doing, but it will keep your silver clean and bright once you put it in the rokusho. And then these little characters here that look kind of like dried brains or something, those are the umeboshi plums. And those are one of the secrets, or at least helpers, in making your rokusho more red. So again, maybe one Earl has said one umeboshi plum, maybe two in a batch of patina. So so Earl, do you have any comments or would like to add anything about how you get? I'm going to go back to your piece. Whoops, because it's just amazing. Has that red stayed?
The red will stay. I found that a long patina works the best. One of the problems with the red is that if you get a really heavy oxide, it tends to rub off. So it helps to coat the piece. Everything you said about the rokusho and the Daikon matches perfectly. We tend to go a long time for the red. We also use a Daikon for a long time, 20 minutes, because we need to protect the silver. The silver gets protected by the Daikon. And last, if you can, in a good red, use a low-grade copper. The low grade works much better than the deoxidized copper. We use the copper that you use for sinks and overhead ventilation fans and roofing. And we call it the common copper, and it makes a much better red.
Yeah, and thank you, Earl. That is such great, great advice, because you know, working as a jeweler and in this sort of in this sort of era, tend to think, oh, the better material, the better. So I'll get my copper from Rio, so I know it's perfect and nice. And to know that actually the common copper is going to give you a better red. Now that's going to be more trouble because you can't just go order a 6x12 of 18 gauge. You got to figure out, Earl, are you able to get the gauge that you want? Or I know you guys do a lot, like you'll actually melt it down and re-roll it to get the dimensions and the thickness you want.
One of the easiest ways, I was clued in by another metal worker, is to go visit your sheet metal shop. And there's usually somebody running at a desk person, and they're often a woman. So if you happen to have a bracelet or maybe a pair of earrings that you can demonstrate with, and maybe even make a small gift to the counter person so they know what you're talking about, you will be in at that shop. I mean, you can have your pick of all the scrap copper they have. And in fact, it's usually in a bin. They just sell it back and melt it. So that's one of the things you can do.
That's interesting. So you think here in San Diego and all of Southern California, I think we have industrial metal supply. That's that's the cheap place to get metal, and they have a lot of different steels and aluminum and all that stuff. So you think that copper would be the common copper?
Yes, that's it. That's the copper, and it actually doesn't have. It's a very pure copper. There's very little else in the copper, but it's enough to get that nice red color. It's much easier than the copper that you get from Rio or the deoxidized copper, like copper pipe or a copper wire, which is almost absolutely pure copper.
Okay.
Yeah, if you find a gutter supply company, they'll usually have scraps that you can get from them. Probably they'll just give it to you, and that will work for you.
Yeah. So this is great knowledge, and it also goes to show that getting the copper red is not easy, and you can spend a lot of time doing it, but understand that it could start at the copper. It could have nothing to do with how long you soaked the daikon, or if you put one too many plums in. It could be that you started back with some copper that was going to make it more difficult. But I will say that I have the experience also of when I did some work for Hiroko Sato Pichinowski. I did a bunch of patterning. And I gave the pieces to her in Japan, mailed them to her in Japan, and she had a Japanese patinator put on the rokusho. And he made every single one of my copper red, and it was all different kinds of copper. It was Japanese copper. Even I had one piece that was red brass and copper, and he didn't know that because I didn't tell them anything, and it came back red. The red brass came back red from the rokusho. So what that tells me is there are a lot of different variables. And I will say also the piece, my piece here on the left, that was as red as it got, and then it faded. It's brown now.
Very good.
Well, it's a shame because now it's brown, but it was a good learning experience. But so Earl, do you think that and I left it in for at least an hour, maybe more. But I think I heard you say that if the oxide builds up too thick, then it will fade.
Yes, that's very true. The best patina we have is on a common copper dish that we use to patina, and it's probably been patinaed by accident by holding the patina when we were patinating. It's probably been days and days and days worth of patina, and I tested that piece. It is not red. It's a nice hard copper color, and I tested it in the sunlight for almost a year, and it didn't fade a bit, and it doesn't rub off. So it can happen.
Okay. The last thing I'll say about the rokusho is that the patina that builds up is a lot thicker and tougher than either of the first two patinas that I talked about. The liver of sulfur and the Baldwin's patinas are very thin layers. They're not a thick layer. So the Roksho is a thicker layer. And so now I'm kind of going into the questions that I got. And of course, the biggest question I think that asked by more than one of you was, how do I get the red? And so we talked about that with the Roksho, and I thought I would just talk about some other options to get red because I know that that is an interesting topic. So I thought I would share these. So I'll share what these images all are as we go through here. So the first thing, I think we talked about that with the Roksho, add a plum. Also, these umaboshi plums, and we will, someone asked how to spell it. I'll write it down in the chat shortly. The umaboshi plums are good, but also the liquid that comes in the jar is good to add. So you can try that. And if you try all that, or you just don't want to try Roksho, it seems like way too complicated, you don't want to get into it, there are some other options. One of them is a patina that I'm calling 3.1 because that's the name in this book. And this is a book by, let's see, I've got it around over here. I'll get it in a sec, but Hughes and Rowe. This is the giant book on patinas that came out in the early 90s. And it's got 500 or 600 pages of patinas. So most of them don't work for Mokume because they have that thick oxide layer and it builds up and you can't see the pattern underneath. But this one works great. You can look it up in that book, and actually I'm going to show you later. But it will give you a pretty good, I'm going to show you that one later. No, it's a different one I'm showing you. Okay. You get a pretty good red from that one. I did that. David Wong knows this. He taught me that in that workshop that I took. And so it's kind of it's more of an orange than a red. It's the one here that my cursor is on right now. Right. So it's more orangey, but it's pretty reliable and it's pretty easy to do. Then another way to get a really nice red in your copper is a Japanese technique called Hido, which basically means fire copper. And it's really fun. You guys should try it. But it takes a lot of bravery and it has limited practical application. The reason is that you need to heat the copper up to almost melting, screaming hot just before it melts into a puddle of goo, and then plunge it in water. And this is also talked about in a lot of different places, so it's not a secret. It's in that Hughes Rowe book. It's in the Color on Metal Facebook group. You can look it up at a bunch of different places. But in the samples here on the screen, this piece right here is done in this way. And that's the exciting thing, is that you can do it with copper and brass. So this center piece, this little diamond shape, is copper brass mokume done with the Hido method. There's a hole here because that made it easy. I just strung it on a steel wire and used a torch. Usually you do the back side, the other side will get better color because it has more reduction. And then when it is almost melting, just before the copper melts, plunge it in water. A little tip, make the water quite warm, almost steaming, and dissolve about a teaspoon of borax in your water container. The cool thing about that is that it will actually fume a little sealant on to your piece. So it's like, it makes a really nice hard coating and it's quite durable. The borax does not affect the color, but it helps seal the patina. So that's this piece. And then it's also this piece down here. So this was a question I got from Instagram, and I forgot who it was. Someone asked, how do I get a good copper red on some mokume that is made of copper and nickel? And that's what this is. This is copper and nickel. So I highly encourage you guys to try this. Those of you, especially those of you that are on the bladesmithing end of this or blacksmithing end of the Mokume Gane spectrum and use more base metals. Obviously, you can't do this technique if there's sterling silver in the Mokume because sterling silver melts at 1600 something, right? So don't do that. But if you are using all base metal Mokume, then copper nickel, really cool. The nickel goes dead black and the copper goes pinky red. It's really cool. So limited application is that you can't heat that piece up again because the patina will come off. And you can't have anything soldered to it because the solder will melt. So, and you have to quench the piece, which is really fairly violent sort of thing to do to it from 1800 degrees to in the water. So you kind of got to plan things ahead and do it in small pieces. And then the last one, I personally, these two on the bottom left and top right are both Rokusho. And so they're as close to red as I've gotten with the Rokusho. It's still not as red as the Hido. That's as red as I've ever seen. Last one, I'm just saying heat coloring, and I'm specifically separating that out from Hido. Hido is 1800 degrees. The piece is almost melting. Heat coloring is more your lower temperatures of heat coloring from like 300 to 500 Fahrenheit. And I have only played with that a little bit because it has limited interest to me because the oxide layer is so thin that it tends to fade or change when you put on some kind of sealant. So I haven't done much of that because I find it too depressing, and I have not been able to successfully get that sealed and still stay a nice red, purple. You can get amazing effects, but it's such a low temperature that oxide layer is very, very thin. All right, so let's see. That was one main question. And so now I just wanted to share some of my newest Mokume experiments with you. And this is the cover of that book that I talked about earlier. Earlier, I talked about the 3.1 patina. Now I'm going to share with you these new experiments I've done with two other patinas from this book, 3.6 and 3.69. And the 3.6 is copper nitrate and ammonia. The 3.69 is copper carbonate and ammonia. And I'm going to show you the actual amounts that I used and the results that I got. And I hope that you guys will take this information and run with it, because my point here is I want the Mokume Gane community to be one of sharing and information and openness rather than like everybody hiding their secrets. So I hope that you guys might feel that same way too, and understand that the more we share with each other, the more the knowledge grows, you know. So I don't see any reason to keep secrets. So, okay, here's my first experiment. And this one was less, I think, successful. The second one was even better. So I took 80 grams of copper nitrate, 1 liter of water, and 5 millimeters of household ammonia. This is slightly different than the recipe in that book. So I altered it mainly because I didn't have the kind of ammonia that he asked for, which is the 880 ammonia. It's really strong. And I used to have some, but I think I sent it to hazardous waste. And so I was like, well, let's give it a try with just your household lemon ammonia. And it worked. So here on the, so we've got, and so that is the results. What I'd like to show you is right now, you're not seeing which one was which, right? And then I'll go to the next screen. And here we go. So the metal that you're looking at is copper and sterling silver. And the left-hand side, this side, is the 3.6. So the image doesn't quite do this justice. The color that the copper went was more red. It was definitely more red than just with Baldwin's. It was darker and more red. But the problem is the sterling silver went quite yellow. Now, at first you might, if you're just looking at this, you might be thinking, why go to that trouble and do that if you get less contrast? However, I think that this bears further investigation, because remember, I'm using sterling silver, and this has been sanded back to the raw sterling. I always do that. So I think that anyone, try doing it with fine silver instead, and try soaking it in the Daikon first. I did not soak in Daikon first. And I think if I had done both of those things, the silver might have stayed the silver color. So I think this bears further investigation. Also keep in mind what, let's see, this is copper nitrate. All right. So, and then the right is Baldwin's, just for comparison. So now, what was the second one I tried? The second one I tried was actually more successful. This was Patina 3.69. And the recipe that I used, which is pretty much the recipe in the book, except for switching out that household lemon ammonia instead of using the stronger 880 ammonia that Hughes and Rowe recommended. So I used 62.5 grams copper carbonate, half a liter of water, 20 milliliters of household lemon ammonia. And this was done, I should say, I don't have any video of this, but I followed the instructions in the book. It's done hot. So about steaming temperature and about 30 minutes, right? So those are the experiments I did. Now we'll look at them more closely and so that you can see what the metals are. So this one, the bottom, if you're familiar with the Mokume, it's easier to look at the bottom one first. This is my classic sort of rainbow combination. It's sterling silver, red brass, and copper. And with Baldwin's Patina, it really just sort of intensifies that color. It's really close, still pretty close to what the brass looks like and what copper looks like. Also note that it was etched first. So you can see the way the light is reflecting off the edges of the patterning here. You can tell the light's coming in at an angle. You can tell the material's been etched. So cut it in half. And this top one is how it came out in that 3.69 patina. And I think this just has a lot of potential. So the brass went this really nice dark black, maybe with a little bit of olive in it. And then the copper stayed pretty much copper. It maybe went a little dark, but not much. So really interesting. And let's review. This is highly geeky, and thank you for those of you that are here and awake. I love it. Copper carbonate. What's the main ingredient of Rokusho? It's copper carbonate. It's basically ground up malachite. So I just think it's really interesting that we got such a dark color out of the brass with copper carbonate plus ammonia. I think there's a lot of possibilities. It makes the mad scientist in me just like come out and want to run around crazy. And I did that for 2 days on my center table, and this is the stuff what I came up with. So here's one more test I did, and this is using a different piece, same chemical, but or same patina, excuse me. So now we're looking at, I'll do the one on the right first, because this is what it looked like before. The whole piece looked like this before I started. This is a patina. This is Baldwin's patina using on a piece of metal that is Kuro Shiguichi, sterling silver, Shiguichi, and copper. Now, for those that it's not immediately obvious, the darkest color is the Kuro Shiguichi, and then the brightest color is the silver. The middle gray is the Shiguichi, and then the coppery color is the copper. And I love this patina, Baldwin's patina on this metal combination. I use it all the time because it's quick and it's easy. It was a little, so this one on the left here, again, you might be thinking, well, this is a little underwhelming. It looks a little bit like I just sanded it, right? And it's just the bare metal colors, but it's not. It is different, and it's interesting. So note that the Kuro Shiguichi actually stayed lighter, and then the Shiguichi is an interestingly different shade. The copper actually stays the darker of all of the colors. So maybe this color combination isn't so successful with the 3.69, but with this knowledge, you could do some really interesting things. So what if you added brass into this mix? Because if you did, you could get straight black with all of these other colors. And I think that would be fabulous. So there's just so much potential here, and can't wait to try more of it. So yeah, that was my foray into mad scientist foray for a while. And let's see. Okay, so now I wanted to, Earl graciously gave me some images of some of what he considers his most interesting patinas that he's done over the years. And so I thought we just share them here. And Earl, you can talk about it or I can talk about it, but let's see, this one was steel, is that correct?
That's right. It was steel.
Steel and copper.
Steel, copper, many layers, through perhaps 21 layers, alternate steel. It's a low carbon steel, and copper.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So, and the patina here is just a heat patina, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So now did you put it in an oven or you just add it with a torch?
This is a difficult one to do because the patina is very subject to small temperature changes. So you try to bring the entire piece up to the one temperature that leaves the color you want, which is a blue or a bronze blue. And I tried an oven. I tried a kiln used for ceramics. It turns out that it's like sunlight. If you put it in the sun, i.e. next to or close to one of the elements, the heating elements, it actually toasts that side and makes it hotter. So I tried putting them inside of a tin can or a tin can-like object. The tin can would actually melt the parts of the tin can that are soldered together. So I actually made a little can of steel to put it inside to keep it out of the sunlight, as it were, and make it even. So that's why it's so even here. You can use a torch if you're very careful and really good, and get a nice even patina.
That's a good, that's a great idea. And I just had that experience recently. I went up and did a little one-day workshop thing, and we made at a Adams Forge in LA, and we made chopsticks. And I didn't finish them there because I was just too much else going on. So I came home and worked in my studio. And the last thing I wanted to do, I did a nice file finish on them, was just do a nice heat patina. And I normally am, when I'm doing that with steel, I'm just tempering it. So I'm just, wanting to get some straw gold near the end, and then I'm done. And so I completely didn't realize how tricky it would be to get the even color all the way along. So my chopsticks are kind of blue and yellow and magenta and all over the place. But yeah, that kiln idea, and then the steel container within the kiln, that's a good idea. Cool. Okay, we've got a couple more. So this is a really interesting one, Earl. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, this is copper, silver. It's fine silver and copper, many layers, perhaps 21 layers, then patterned. And then what I did was cleaned it completely and hung it in a jar that had a small amount of ammonia in the bottom of it. So it hung in the fumes of household ammonia for quite some time. And the boundaries between the copper and the silver turned this green blue copper oxide, at which point I stopped and I thought, well, that's really good. Unfortunately, it rubs off. So it has to be sealed as it stands. But it is a nice blue-green color. Mm-hmm. And it's a color that's lacking in my Mokume, and I want to get blues and greens and cool colors in my Mokume.
Sure. Yeah, and that definitely has some potential. And it's not something I would have thought, again, because I think if it's flaky, I just don't want to deal with it. But if you're willing to deal with it and seal it and use it in such a way that it's protected in whatever end product that you're making, then it's certainly worth pursuing. Okay. And then this one also was a great, it's just so colorful. And so I'm curious if you can tell us what metals in the process, and then also, has it stayed this color?
Yes, it has. It has stayed that color. It's brass, copper, and nickel silver. The brass is a red brass. And it was a surprise to me because it was an accident. I put the piece into cool rock show, and I could see the patina starting to form. That little flash around the opening in the tsuba started to form. And I thought, oh, wow, this is really wild. So I just left it, and at a cool rock show, perhaps body temperature, you get this wonderful patina. And I don't know if it's dependent upon the wide pattern. This piece is about 3 inches across.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have found the wider patterns, everything happens more easily. That patina, that 3.69, I didn't take any images of this. I'm just realizing right now, I did just copper brass as well, and it was not as successful. The thin brass lines took a long time to get black, and there was always a bright brass flash too. It didn't, a place that didn't go black. It reminded me a lot of trying to get a good copper curamido patina in Rokusho. It's so interesting, so much more geeky things that we could talk about, including the galvanic action that happens in Rokusho and a lot of the boiling patinas. The silver, the action of having silver in between each layer seems to intensify and make a lot of the patina colors better. And that's a fun thing with Mokume, because we can do that. But I think that's the last. Oh, let's see. Okay, so here I just need to, I want to plug my classes a little bit for those still watching the video, and then then I'll show the secret to getting the best patterns clean, clear, and then I'll answer all your guys' questions that are here. So I just wanted to say, if any of you want to join me for an actual class, I'm doing my metamorphic Mokume class at the end of June. It's 2 days online. And of course, you can see that all about the details about that on my website. And then what I'm very excited about is my first in-person classes since last October will be at Mendocino. And that's in Northern California. We're going to be doing a 3-day fusing class, and then 3-day, I call it the art of Mokume Gane. It's because I don't want to get tied down to teaching any specific patterning technique, but I want to actually tailor it to who signs up. So I've already got quite a few of my folks that I've been teaching online for years that are signed up for this Art of Mokume class. And so we're going to have a ball just doing whatever patterning that they want to do, and also new things, and it's going to be great. So so that's what I'm up to, and we will get to everybody's questions that I see here. Oh, and you guys see this image right here, the twist on the right here, the metals that you're looking at. This was one of the pieces that went to Japan and was patinated by a Japanese specialist. That's copper and red brass alternating with silver. And you see, it's just like a darker red and a lighter red. They're both red. They're both still red. In Japan, they seal with lacquer once they do the patinas. Nowadays, it used to be the Iboto wax, but now it's lacquer. I don't really like it because it's real shiny, and it really feels like you can't touch the metal. But gosh, it sure makes the colors stay nice. So there's that. And then here's the fun thing. We'll let this go. I'll turn the sound down. But here's my secret. When you're putting a patina on Mokume, you have to get all of the existing oxides off. You have to, or the patinas can't do their job. So the last time you heat up a piece of Mokume, right after that, you got to sand it like you mean it, right? So that was 280 sandpaper. I don't know what I'm doing there. I'm probably putting I'm getting some water. Actually, I like to use the sandpaper wet so that it can go up and down over any little bumps and wiggles. You got to get that top oxide layer off. And that's the secret. You can't, and by hand, is because if you use some kind of rotary polisher, you're going to smear the colors together. the by hand seems just works the best. You also don't want to go to a high polish, because if you go to a high polish, you won't see the colors. You're going to seal the metal. It'll be all shiny. The patinas won't go in, and you won't see them anyway because the metal will be shiny. So let's see, I'll skip ahead here. Whee! So I did 280 sandpaper, then I switched to 400 sandpaper in a different direction. And that's what I'm doing there. And then the last step, I'm going to use this 400 polishing cloth. And that's the final step. 400 is as fine as I go, because if it's finer than that, if it's anything shiny, the patina is not going to show. So, so there's my secret. And then video me finishes that, I'll go ahead and start answering your guys' questions. So first one from Chapin asks, what do I use to do my etching? Oh, and that's a great question, because I use different things depending on what I'm etching. My rings, I actually use nitric acid because I'm wanting the silver to etch. Let's see, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. I'll just come back and say hello and answer the questions. It's easier. I can kind of connect with you guys. So for the etching, so nitric acid if I'm using rings, if I'm doing rings, for the anything brass or copper, actually I still use nitric. You could use ferric chloride instead. But that's a related question. Chapin, you may be asking this for rings. You may be thinking about rings, and so nitric acid for silver is your answer. But if you are thinking of etching any of the metal combinations that we've talked about today, understand that that is its own kettle of fish, because depending on what alloy you have, when you put it into any kind of etchant, it's probably going, or any kind of mordant, I should say, it's probably going to etch the copper faster. And that means if you have an alloy like Shiguichi or Kuro Shiguichi, it's going to etch the copper out of that alloy faster. And so if you, and I've seen this happened to me, I had a piece that was silver and Kuro Shiguichi. I'll just keep it a little simple there. Sterling silver, Kuro Shiguichi, 95% copper with 5% silver, stick it in nitric acid, it eats the copper away from the surface. Suddenly it's not Kuro Shiguichi anymore, it's Shiguichi. And it's going, and it's the copper, the silver content on the surface is increasing, and the copper content on the surface is decreasing, because the mordant is etching away the copper faster than the silver. And that can affect your patinas. So figuring out what metal combinations you can etch, and then which patina you put on them is quite a thing. And that was one of the reasons I was excited about that 3.69 patina, because it does not, you can etch your piece first. I'm losing my mind. I'm trying to figure out why exactly that was exciting. Oh, you can get the black on an etched surface. So usually my Kuro Shiguichi is not etched, because it does that thing where it turns into Shiguichi or even a lighter gray. But now if I use that 3.69 instead, I can use brass, etch the brass, then put on the 3.69 patina and get an etched black and silver surface. So that's exciting to me. All right, long question, long answer to a short question. So I'm looking at your other questions now. So Kay wanted to know about shelf life with Baldwin's. I think there is. Baldwin's has a lot of ammonia in it. And the ammonia, I think, is you can, over time, it starts to degrade. I would say 6 months to a year. You can add the life back a little bit by adding a little more of ammonia. But that's also, when I teach my classes, I always send out, even like I got people that have taken 5 or 6 online classes with me. Every time you go to the class, I mail you out a new little bottle of Baldwin's, and that's why. So always buy the smallest bottle of Baldwin's that you can, is the answer there. Now, Annette asks about the Daikon before or after the Rogue show. The Daikon is before the Rogue show. And it does something to the surface. It leaves like an enzyme layer on the surface that will protect the silver, but still allow the copper alloys to patinate. And I just go straight from one to the other. And I've certainly seen a lot of people that use rokusho that have a big mess of daikon in their rokusho. It's fine. It doesn't really hurt anything. But I actually learned from Hiroko to just use the juice from the daikon and not use the pulp at all. So you can grate the daikon, wrap it in cheesecloth and squeeze the cheesecloth. And now you just have liquid, and then you can add up to 10 times the amount of distilled water so that you create a liquid with no goo, with no yucky radish bits in it. And it can keep things a little cleaner. So there's that. Oh, and then Diana asks how to spell umeboshi, plum. So I'm figuring out how to do that here and reply back to everybody. Everyone in meeting. Okay, let's see if I do this. UMOE, umeboshi. I wouldn't like take this to the bank, folks. I think it's right. Umeboshi plum. Yeah, that looks right. UMOEBOSHI. And I've just sent it in the chat as well for those of you that are here with us live. And let's see, other questions. Oh, and thanks. And Dale says, Kuro Shiguichi is 5% silver, Shiguichi is 25%. Is that correct? There's kind of a wiggly line between those. The less silver content, the more likely you should call it Kuro Shiguichi. I think perhaps up to 10%, excuse me, up to 10% could be called Kuro Shiguichi. And then technically, of course, Shiguichi means 1/4. So technically 25% is Shiguichi, 25% silver is Shiguichi. It's used up to 40% silver. And that's actually a beautiful light gray. It's kind of a bear to work with though, because it's really tough and it doesn't spread much when you are forging your billet down. It'll stay really tight and small as you're forging down in relative to the other metals, but it's a beautiful light gray. And they call that Shiro Shiguichi, which I believe means light.
It contrasts with silver really nice, the gray.
Yeah, but a nice subtle. One of my favorite things to do is to leave copper out completely and have a billet that is just silver and the different light levels of Shiguichi.
Yeah, I would say the best day to do a patina is Tuesdays.
And
it's tricky. It's just hard to reproduce what you've done. It's very challenging.
Yeah.
So Tuesdays are better for me.
Okay, good advice. People do get kind of superstitious about it. You know, whatever works, they're going to keep doing that, you know? Yeah.
I have here some pickled plum. I went and grabbed some from the cupboard. It's just called, you can see that.
Sure, I'll put
It's
you.
just pickled plum.
Pickled plum.
Yeah.
And you know, you can get it from if you live in an area with you know, a fair amount of Asian population, you find the Asian grocery store, or just find the big fancy grocery store in the middle of town that has more of that kind of stuff. But it's pretty easy to find. At least in San Diego and in Monterey. You guys can let us know. Right. Let's say I have a question about what temperature I use for those 3.6 and 3.69 patinas. I was not quite happy with, I didn't get it as close to boiling as I would like. The Hughes Monroe book recommended boiling, but I was using a little hot plate and it was more like steaming, but it worked. So it might work better hotter with that just copper brass, but it worked great with any of the metals that had silver in between each layer.
Do you ever, Toshi used to recommend that you heat for rokusho, that you heat it for 10 minutes, your piece almost boiling, the solution, and then to take it out, quench it, take it out, put it in water, and then back into the daikon. And then go back into your rokusho after that. So I mean, there's different, you know, you should it's worthy to play around and see what works for you.
I've seen a lot of people do that, and they might do it. They might be doing it, or I might have thought they were doing it just to check and see how the color is progressing as well. Because
Yeah.
in 10 minutes, you're going to see color for sure. You should. I know Ford would do that, and he would get clues from that would tell him if he needed to add alum to the Rokusho solution, if he needed to, if there were any areas that weren't completely clean, if he needed to stop and scrub, clean the piece more. But that makes sense too, though, Jean, that now the piece is hot, can go back in the Daikon solution. It makes sense that it would activate it more.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Kay asks what percentage of nitric in the etching solution. This is, I take 70% fuming nitric from the bottle. It's scary. You take the lid off and little fumes come out. And then it's 3-to-1. So do as you order, add acid to water, right? So put 3 parts water in a container and then add the 1 part nitric acid, right? And it lasts a long time if you're only doing silver. If you're etching copper, it's completely different. If you're etching copper, you should use it a little less strong. Actually, I'm realizing normally I use super pickle a lot to etch. If that rainbow combination I do, that's silver, copper, and red brass, I use super pickle, which is regular pickle plus hydrogen peroxide. Let's see. So Natalie's asking about making Shiguichi, and she's not sure if she got the metal ratios accurate. Well, I mean, have a good scale, and don't get too, actually, the nice thing about Shiguichi is it can have a wide range that's good, right? So from 5% to at 25%, you're going to get a nice gray, black to gray when you patinate. But of course, I understand you want to know, right? So yeah, I would say get a good scale. Like, I mean, it's not good; it's cheap. This is like from Harbor Freight. It's no problem. I've had it for like, I don't know, 20 years or something. If you're making small quantities, this will do you fine. It has troy ounces and grams and penny weights. But the thing is, we're often using scrap, and you got to keep in mind, if you're using sterling silver scrap, that's not 100% silver. And I know that a lot of my friends have a lot of metal lying around that's like, you got scraps of this and scraps of that, and it's some kind of Shiguichi because it's got copper and silver in it. All right. So yeah, I would say, Natalie, experiment and at least try to have one that has more and one that has less silver in it, so that you'll get good contrast between the different colors. Let's see.
We had a wonderful hint from Ford Hallam, which I should pass on to you.
Mm-hmm.
We tried for years to forge Shiguichi with minimum success, cracking, breaking, just intractable metal. And it turns out that Ford Hallam had the way to do it, which is to heat the metal up to dull red color and quench it in water. After you do that, you can forge Shiguichi down to 2/3 its thickness, sometimes even half its original thickness. It becomes a very easily forged metal. So I wanted to pass that on because we spent years fighting this stuff, and then finally found out how to forge it.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Gosh.
All right, I want to get to, so at the beginning, we had a few questions that came in before I started the recording, and I just want to go in a low-tech way, and I'm just going to go through those. So Kay asked about, she's doing bimetal etching with copper and silver. So Kay, I think that you probably saw that the Baldwin's patina would be a great choice for you. It doesn't give you as much contrast. The copper's not going to go black, but it'll go a nice dark brown, and it's really easy to use. So I'd highly recommend trying that.
I think the problem I was having is I had old Baldwins. It was a year old, and I didn't know that there was a shelf life. So.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to juice it with some ammonia, and if it doesn't work, I'll get some more.
Okay. Okay. And do also make sure that your metal's nice and clean.
Oh, yeah.
You know, yeah, okay. And Dale, so you've got some, Dale has some billets that he's not sure if it's copper silver or copper nickel silver. And so Dale, I'm thinking just put some Baldwins on there. And if the silver stays bright, if the light colored metal stays bright, then you've got silver. If the bright colored metal starts to go dark as well, then you've got copper and nickel silver. And I think that would be a less aggressive way to test it than to heat it to 1800 degrees. But that would certainly be another way to test it. And let's see, what other questions did we have? People wanted to know what sealant, and I don't tend to like the permalac and the spray on the spray on sealants and the lacquers. I tend to just use the Renaissance wax. Renaissance wax is not the strongest sealant, but it's the least obtrusive visually. It feels like you're still touching metal, and I prize that. But what I give up for that is that the metal does still tend to change over time, but I don't end up with a shiny, slick sort of surface. Now, I have heard certainly that some people have good results with using a satin instead of the shiny, instead of the gloss. And it all depends on the application. If you can apply it well and thinly, you can really make it pretty close to just feeling like metal. But again, just I just say what I do is I use Renaissance wax and heat it first. Heat the piece till it just, you don't want to touch it. And then spread the wax on, let it cool a little bit, start to buff it. As it cools, you can buff it harder and harder until and it's really a pretty good surface that way. But I'm curious now, Earl and Jean, I know have different sealants. Do you want to talk about your sealing process at all?
Well, maybe Earl feels the same. The permalac, the original one, or the one that the satin is the one that I like, but then you can't get it anymore in California. So you have to find somebody in Tennessee who will send it to you, which is, I don't know why you can't get it in California. But
So it must have something in it that's regulated, like
yeah, exactly,
like denatured alcohol or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I like that, the original permalac satin.
Satin. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely bears some research on parts. I'm not saying that Renaissance wax is the only way to go. It's just what I use. All right. So I think I've answered all the questions that have come in. I think I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to our online, our recorded section, so that I can just answer any questions a little less formally. But as I end this recorded section, I will just say I hope to see you guys again. You can check me out at my website, anvilstudio.com, to see when the next free live Mokume presentation. It's kind of, I say a Q&A, but it's really kind of morphing into a presentation. It's just my way as a teacher to sort of get my ducks in a row and I have a deadline to show people something new. So I'm actually thinking that the next one is I've got an idea that the next one is going to be a who's who. And this is not any kind of a ranking or anything like that. It's just to talk a little bit about the history of Mokume and who's making it now and who they are, and have some images. And so I would say to those of you that are watching either live or watching this later, contact me and let me know, give me some, send me some images if you'd like to be included in the who's who for next time. And I expect that will be sometime in June. Today is May 14th, probably sometime in June of 2022. Okay, so stick around if you're here live, but otherwise, I hope to see you again, either in my videos or in one of my classes. Thanks for watching.